people are still engaged in the work that they do. But at the same time, they find the job harder to sustain. So we've got to find ways to bring that humanity back into the system. And we think that the solution is out there somewhere. But there's somewhere out there that's not doing what they should be doing. But really, it's about who we are and how we show up in the work that we do that will create that sense of humanity back in the system.
That was Caroline Picard, retired assistant superintendent of the Conseil scolaire francophone de la Colombie-Britannique, the French school board of British Columbia. She's talking about bringing the humanity back into our educational system. I'm Stan Baker, one of the hosts of Circle Forum, along with Shelley Steele and Steve Young. Caroline talks and demonstrated in her school district leadership that taking the time to connect with principals and other leaders builds a sense of belonging and actually saves you time in the long run.
This week's podcast is brought to you by the word compassionate, which comes from the Latin meaning to suffer together. School leadership that is compassionate helps address conflicts together, enhances staff morale together and student well-being together. It's time for all leaders to listen up and up their listening to increase their compassionate leadership.
At the end of this episode, be sure to visit our website, www.restorative.ca, where you can find some great ideas on leadership in schools from a restorative relational perspective. And if you enjoy this episode, make sure you subscribe. Let's head over to this discussion now with Shelley, Steve, and me, Stan. As the assistant superintendent, you scheduled 15 to 20-minute meetings with each principal in your district. Why did you do that, and what did you do there?
So I had about 15 to 20, 30 minutes blocked in my schedule where principals, when I send on Sunday night, I used to send an information bulletin to them, and the link was in there so they could sign up on Calendly to meet with me for 30 minutes. And they are all booked all the time. I had put that time aside for them. And really what it was about is having a conversation and listening to them, right? What's going on? What's happening? How can I help? How can I support you? What you're doing? And what that created is that I switched from being a reactive leader to really a proactive leader, because I was totally aware of what was going on in those schools, right? So it became a very nice way to connect and share and really listen deeply. And that's what we learned in this compassionate system training, is how to use a generative listening so people feel seen, heard, and valued, and change the culture.
I'm just curious, were there some that didn't sign up over time and that made you wonder, maybe I should be more aggressive in contacting them and finding out why they're not signing up?
I had very few that did not sign up, and I would reach out and ask them to meet. It was not something that they had to do, but I was encouraging them to say, hey, I've got a couple questions for you. When is a good time to connect? So I would tell them that it's me needed to connect with them, but I would actually use that time to find out a few more things about them and their school and their leadership.
Okay. It sounds like it was supporting them by feeling heard, and it almost sounded like a low-key opportunity to just, if they're having wonderings or pondering, rather than in a crisis mode, right? Just I've been wondering about these things, but in turn, it really supported you as well.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, it did support me. And it gave me a really good picture of what the challenges were and what the success were in school. So when I sat at the board meeting or at the superintendent meeting, I was able to support those principals coming up with what were the challenges in the field. Really, because of it's a provincial district and we had very few opportunity to actually be on the site, it was a wonderful way for me to stay connected to the context of school.
And what I'm also just thinking when I'm hearing you talk about that is, often in restorative practices, we talk about the quiet voices being heard.
Yes.
Because often it is the quiet voices. They're not going to reach out to their superintendent or assistant superintendent unless it's something, a really huge issue or something that needs to happen quickly. So this was giving an opportunity to hear from those quiet voices, I'm guessing too.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Those people you don't hear from felt very comfortable in that space, in that Zoom space to just be themselves. And it was a very confidential call too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Did the conversations or the questions change over time once they got more comfortable, or once they saw this as an opportunity? And were the questions more around operational kind of issues, or did they change to become sort of leadership type or coaching, or just, hey, I just want to talk and tell you how bad my week has been?
Interesting you're asking that, because what I found is that if they met regularly, now I was starting to hear the success stories.
Mm.
And they were so happy and proud to be able to take that moment and tell me about it, right? So what I would do is often invite them to be part of a board meeting. Hey, how about you bring this group to the next board meeting so we can hear them sing, or we can hear them. So it was a beautiful connection for me to make between schools and board, or school and superintendent. I was really the middle person that could make that happen.
When you say that about sharing celebrations, it makes me think about one of the questions we ask students to find out whether or not they belong. And the question is, do you have someone at school, an adult at school, that you can share good news with?
Yeah.
And what you're saying is that as adults, we need that same type of person to share good news with.
I agree. That sense of belonging is so important. And for them, one thing that I've learned working with EdCan, which is a across the country nonprofit organization, we do surveys with Guarding Mind. And one thing that comes out many times is people don't feel recognized, right? So I found that in those 30 minutes, we were really telling them, you're so important for the system. We need to hear you. So yeah, that sense of belonging to a very important system, because they felt isolated. They were spread out throughout the province and not connected. We invited them a couple times a year to gather, but really those were very special moments where that was their time to be listened.
A colleague, a principal from a neighboring school, said, you never want to talk to your superintendent, because if you go to your superintendent with problems, they're just going to think you don't know how to do your job. So just never talk to them, never call them. If they call you, you talk to them, but you never reach out to them. And I had another superintendent who would, his assumption was, if he didn't have to drop into your school, then that must mean things were going okay. So if you saw him in your school, or if you got a call from him, what must be going wrong? And so the superintendent was the bad news carrier. And a lot of people believe that for a long period of time, that how superintendents led is that I just stay out of your way, I'll call you if I need to, thing, as opposed to, as you say, being more proactive and building those relationships. And what restorative practices tells us, and what we tell our leaders, is build those relationships before there's a crisis. So when there is a crisis, you're much better able to deal with it, because now you've got a personal relationship with that person. And that I saw that changing over time, to the point just before I retired, I had a superintendent who was absolutely fantastic at doing similar to what you were doing, although he would travel around and do personal drop-ins, but they were scheduled. It was like once a month, and you knew he was coming. And his questions were not, walk me around and show me what your teachers are doing. It was, sit down in the office and tell me how things are going. Tell me what you need me to do. And it was very much supportive, similar to what you're doing. And it's the way you're talking, it sounds like what he was doing.
What would you say to those superintendents who are still visiting Steve's in schools with that type of a message?
Yeah. What I find is that when you model the connection in the relationship, then the principal goes on and does it with their staff, right?
Yes.
So I find that if you want to build that culture, you have to take the time to make those relationships like you're mentioning, right? So in districts we've worked with across Canada, we have oftentimes give them that strategy. If you can make your way to the school, and like you're saying, Stephen, I agree that it's about the conversation, the quality of the conversation you're having with your principals, that's going to build that culture and that trust, really, because trust is about connecting, and the connection is your presence, right? And it's also about compassion, to care about others. So if you're showing up in a school and you take that time to have that conversation, you are showing connection and you're showing compassion. And by your behavior, you're showing your credibility, which build a trust. And like you were saying, Shelley, when you get into a situation where it's critical and you have to use a VTRA, for instance, then you have built those relationships and the trust is there for the situation to get better.
Now, you mentioned something about the complexity of the job actually making you look at retiring early until you took these courses. What was it about the complexity that got to you? Because I think that there are a lot of principals that are in situations where the complexity is burning them out.
Yeah.
How does this compassion help them to deal with that complexity and burnout?
Absolutely. Not only in my last couple of years or even 8 years, I was part of that complexity, but the district I work with now, I can see how the struggle is real, right? Not only the complexity of a school, of a system, but the complexity of the world, what we're dealing with right now, with everything that's going on with climate change and anxiety and the war and all those really complex elements that are creating some kind of stress in the system at many levels. And now when you enter into a school, the complexity is about workload. It's about the balance between their professional life and their personal life. And it's also about the needs, the complexity of the classroom itself, the needs of the students that are present every day that you must attend to, and they feel that they cannot meet those needs. And that's really stressful for someone who's passionate. In those survey that we do, the engagement is outstanding.
It sounds like you've read something by Michael Fullan on what principals should do to create a sense of hope and engagement with the issues facing the world today,
Yes.
right?
There's a few things for sure. And I think that the success of an organization, a school or a system or a school district right now is really around the quality of the conversations, right? So the things that we do in compassionate system is to really pay attention to how we show up. So how we listen, how we hold space for people, and how we contribute to a conversation. And it's changing the way people are talking to each other. It's making those connections, right? Peter Senge says, connect before content. So we take that time, and it doesn't have to be 15 minutes. It can be 5 minutes. But the people I work with right now, we do take the time to check in, and we take 20 to 30 minutes to do it. And what we do is a short mindfulness practice or a question like you're suggesting, Stan. It could be just a question. And we take a moment to journal with paper and pen. And we give people time to self-reflect on those questions or that mindfulness practice we just had with a few questions. And then we put them in small groups, and we give them a chance to just take turns, one at a time, 1 or 2 minutes each, to share their journaling or share their reflection at the moment. And once everybody has had a chance to share, they may cross talk for the remaining of the time. So that's the small protocol that when they start using, when they go back to their school, is actually really powerful. Simple, yet so powerful. And it doesn't have to be 20 to 30 minutes. It could be 5-10 minutes, and it changes the social field. That's what we call in compassionate system, we call it the generative social field, which is the vibe that's in the environment, right? So people come in from all kinds of situation, or they had a huge day, and then you give them a time to chill, ground themselves, journal and talk, and then it changes the whole social field.
I was the principal of the native school. It was on an island, and the way we did meetings and the way the band council met was very much that. And it was explained to me by the education manager one day, who was native, who said, in our community, you don't walk into a 2 o'clock meeting and jump into the agenda at 2:01. We talk, we get to know each other, we ask each other about the weather, we talk about the fishing, we talk about your family, we do all this, and it's a social time together. Even though the people have seen each other every day for weeks on end, they start the meeting by that social time. And it's very much what you're describing is we ease into the agenda. And if it starts 15 minutes or 20 minutes after the meeting starts or half an hour, then so be it. But there's this natural pause where everybody says, okay, I think we can talk about why we're here now. But everything before that was just getting to know you. And that was the way they handled meetings. And it's something I learned a long time ago. So when I dealt with parents or dealt with teachers it was sit down, let's talk about how's your day going? What's been going on with you or your family? And then you ease into that tough conversation when you're both relaxed a little bit.
It also changes the quality of the conversation for the rest of the meeting. And that's what First Nations are doing. And we work alongside First Nation people because the principles, the First People's principles of learning are really linked to the compassionate system leadership. There's a lot of similarities, right? Exactly what you're saying, Stephen.
Why are we not able to see shifts in these very big systems, even though we know there's better ways to do things, people agree with you in the moment, but yet we continue to do the work the same way in these large systems?
Yeah. When you see the structure that we have right now, it creates those behaviors, right? Unless we change the structures, the behaviors are going to be the same, right? So in compassionate system leadership, what we learn is there is mental models right now. And unless we work on those mental models, nothing's going to change. In BC, we had a new curriculum 9 years ago. We still call it the new curriculum, right? And it was fantastic. Those competencies are like, yeah, that's what we need to do with our students. But then we have the artifacts, which is a report card that took many years to meet the needs of this new curriculum, right? Unless we adjust our mental models, the educators in the field were saying, wow, okay, this is great, but we still have to evaluate this way, right? The mental models were not looked after. It was really hard on some educators to do the change, right? And the artifacts that we were trying to change took a long time. So in the system right now, we have those mental models, the way we think, the way we feel, the way we act right now. We need to work on those mental models if we were able to change those structures, right? So a lot of people are keen on doing things differently, right? But it's going to take time. It's not going to happen this year I'm going to be long gone and retired, really retired before the system is changing. I just find that this compassionate system right now is really bringing hope back in the system because people are finally taking the time to have those conversations and listen to each other. We know that students right now we're not meeting the needs of all students in the system right now. Are we preparing them for this world we just talked about? Is the day that we're offering them meaningful to all of them? Are we making them change makers and contributors with their strengths? And that's all kids want. They want meaning. They want relationship. They want to feel value, and they want to be a change makers. And when we interview kids, they don't talk about technology. They don't talk about teachers. They talk about that sense of belonging. They want to belong and contribute.
Are there preconditions that principals need to be able to make that mental model shift? And if you have an example of one that worked out quite well or another one that didn't, that might illustrate what principals need in order to make that shift.
We are offering them tools and practices to get to that. What we're finding is it's really hard to them to jump in and use those tools because they have to internalize them first. They need to learn them first. They need to feel good and confident before they go out and try even the check-in, right? The check-in is not something everybody's comfortable doing. Definitely not the mindfulness. So we give them very small little pieces of practices that they can start with. But actually, when we look at the iceberg, for example, or the creative tension, very few leaders, principals, will go back the next day and try something right away. They need to think about it. They need to use it in their own way of being, right? They need more support to be able to actually use them. And what we find is that when they come to those learning with a team, just not them holding all that responsibility, but when they come with a group of people, like in one district, we've worked with groups of school people coming together, then they go back and they're not the only one using that language, right?
It sounds very much like what we've talked about a lot in terms of using circles, whether that's circles in the classroom or circles in meeting with parents or circles in the staff room, that we need to have people experience it in order to make some changes to actually say, oh, wow, this worked really well. Like I could do this, right? See
Yeah.
it and be part of it.
Yes. And alongside with the people in their building, right? The adults in their building. And it's okay to not be successful at first. Model that vulnerability to be able to learn from it, right? What can I do better next time? I remember using those tools as an assistant superintendent in my district. And wow, after a few sessions, I'm going, whoa, this is not working. I have to readjust that, right? I need to. So it's important for them to have those conversations, try something, come back, have those conversations. How can we make this work better? Go back and try again. And it's a long term. It's not a quick fix. It's not all going to transform your culture instantly, right? You need to give it time. You need to invest in that time. You need to get your people alongside with you, learning and building that capacity for many years. And the most important thing is if your principal or your leader of your school leaves, then that learning has to keep going, right? So that's the building capacity that we try to really focus on when we work with school leaders.
Thinking back to when you were a principal, if you knew then what you know now, how would that have changed your practice?
Oh, many things. I knew then that giving myself time to learn about the context of a school before trying to make it different and changing things and improving things and contributing, just get in there and listen and build those relationships, right? First, and take the time to do it.
Often we don't feel like we have the time. There's so much pressure from all over, from
Right?
superintendents and from assistant superintendents too, right?
Yeah. I find that we need to give ourselves permission to not have all those distractions and tell our staff for the next few months, I will be listening and building those relationships. It's not going to be about doing those many things. It's going to be about building those relationship. And I find it's hard for principals to do that, right? Because we're so efficient. We're doers. We do lots. We multitask and we get things done, right? But if we don't have those relationships, it goes back to those hard moments where it gets complex and difficult.
If you had 3 wishes for the education system, and maybe even for principals, what would your 3 wishes for principals be?
Give them time for their self relationship. Another wish would be to let them learn what's important for them to learn, because we all have different needs at different times. So not push them towards specific learning, but say, hey, what do you need to learn now in where you are at? And my last wish for principals would be to make sure that they feel a sense of recognition for the amazing work that they do and find ways to let them know that they matter in this complex world that they live in every day.
You piqued my curiosity around this whole concept of compassionate system leadership. and where I see it overlapping some of the work we're doing with restorative conversations. I appreciate that, and thank you for sharing that. It's been very interesting.
I really appreciate your questions and your curiosity towards compassionate systems. It brings me so much hope to know that our kids are in good hands and we are doing the work so they keep learning and growing in the way they should be. And I'm really curious about those links with the work that you do, because I'm hearing very similar elements of both, right? I think the work that you do is so important.
I think why we've enjoyed this conversation so much is that we do hear the links, and it feels so good to hear somebody else doing that kind of work that we're trying to do. And the points that you brought up around students needing to feel a sense of belonging, we're hearing that over and over again about staff at all levels, that they need to be seen and heard and feel appreciated. But what really stuck out to me was this concept of bringing back hope, because I think that's why many are leaving the profession at all levels, because there is not a feeling of hope. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for the experience. I really appreciate it.
Caroline had 3 wishes for principals. 1. Have some time for self-reflection. 2. Let principals learn what's important for principals to learn. And 3. Feel and hear the recognition for the amazing work that you're doing as a principal in a school. Find out more about our work with restorative practices and leadership at www.restorative.ca. You can send me an email to stan@restorative.ca. Connect before content. Good advice for principals to develop a sense of belonging for teachers in their building.